May 12th, 1943, near Tunis, North Africa. The desert wind carried the bitter scent of diesel and defeat. Under the blazing sun, the once proud Afrika Korps stood in silence, helmets tilted low, uniforms caked with dust and surrender. A convoy of American GMC trucks idled nearby, their olive-drab paint glinting under the North African Sunday. The engines hummed steadily, a sound that, to the weary German prisoners, felt endless, mechanical, unstoppable. Oberleutnant Karl Brenner, aged 27, watched his men climb aboard with hollow eyes. Only a month ago, they had believed Rommel would regroup, that the tide might turn again. But now the desert fox was gone, and the desert itself had devoured their hope. Brenner's hand brushed against the chipped steel of his Mauser rifle before it was taken from him by an American MP. "You won't need that anymore, Lieutenant," the guard said, his accent flat, almost casual. The Germans expected scorn or humiliation. Instead, they were given water clean, cold, abundant. A corporal passed around metal canteens filled from vast US Army water tanks. Brenner stared. Even here, thousands of miles from home, the Americans had everything in quantities the Wehrmacht could only dream of. As the convoy moved toward the coast, Brenner caught sight of something extraordinary: rows of American trucks, hundreds of them, lined up with mathematical precision. Each bore crates, fuel drums, spare parts. "They fight with factories," muttered Feldwebel Dieter Kraus beside him. "We fight with courage." Neither spoke again as the sun set over the Tunisian hills, the sound of engines blending with the hum of distant victory. The prisoners didn't know it yet, but their journey was only beginning. Their destination was not a camp in Europe, but across an ocean they had never seen, in a land that would shake everything they thought they knew about war, power, and the future. June 2nd, 1943, mid-Atlantic. The sea was steel grey and restless, dotted with the silhouettes of liberty ships stretching from horizon to horizon. Each vessel carried the pulse of America's war machine: tanks, trucks, ammunition, food, and men. But on this voyage, one ship carried something else: thousands of German prisoners of war bound for the United States. Oberleutnant Karl Brenner stood on the upper deck, his wrists free but his mind shackled with disbelief. The convoy was enormous destroyer escorts slicing through the waves, aircraft circling overhead. "Gott, I am Himmel," murmured Kraus, clutching the railing as another Liberty ship slid by, stacked high with cargo containers and artillery crates. "How many of these do they have?" An American sailor, no older than 20, overheard him and grinned. "About one every 3 days, buddy," he said, patting the steel bulkhead. "All made back home." Brenner turned, eyes narrowing. "Every 3 days?" The sailor nodded. "Built in shipyards by women, old men, anyone who can hold a wrench. We don't stop, never stop." Then he walked away, humming a tune, something simple, defiant, almost cheerful. The German officer said nothing, but his thoughts churned. In Germany, even the most efficient shipyards required months to produce a single destroyer. Yet here the Americans were stamping out ships faster than U-boats could sink them. That night, under a canopy of stars, the prisoners huddled on deck, watching as another Liberty ship passed in the distance, lights faint but steady. The rhythmic pounding of diesel engines became hypnotic, a sound that carried the weight of a nation's will. Brenner thought of Berlin's factories, shattered by Allied bombers, and the ration cards his mother used to stand in line for. He looked again at the endless convoy cutting through the Atlantic like a mechanical serpent. He finally understood the quiet confidence in the American sailors' eyes. This was not chaos, this was rhythm, industrial rhythm, and it never stopped. When land finally appeared, it wasn't the Europe they had known. It was a continent of noise, speed, and impossible abundance. June 20th, 1943, Hampton Roads, Virginia. At dawn, the fog parted, revealing a skyline unlike anything the prisoners had imagined. Dock cranes rose like iron giants over the harbor, cables groaning as Liberty ships unloaded tanks, jeeps, aircraft parts, a river of metal flowing onto the docks. As the POW ship slid into the port, Karl Brenner gripped the railing, his breath catching. The docks stretched for miles, alive with motion forklifts, trucks, cranes, men shouting in a dozen accents. "So this is America," whispered Kraus, eyes wide. On the pier, a military band played softly as cargo handlers worked in perfect synchronization. No chaos, no confusion, every movement seemed rehearsed. A sergeant barked orders. Hundreds of crates were stacked with geometric precision. "It's like a machine," said one of the German engineers beside Brenner. "No, it is a machine. A living one." Liam. The Germans were herded off the ship, past rows of guards, and into waiting convoys of olive-drab buses. As they rolled inland, Brenner pressed his face to the window. What he saw stunned him. Highways lined with billboards, endless streams of civilian cars, and construction crews paving new roads even in wartime. "Impossible," whispered Kraus. "They have enough asphalt for this? Enough fuel?" The American guard sitting nearby chuckled. "We got plenty, buddy. You ain't seen nothing yet." Hours later, the convoy passed a vast aircraft plant outside Baltimore. Through the bus windows, the Germans saw women in blue coveralls guiding bomber fuselages down assembly lines. Dozens of B-24 Liberators stood in rows, gleaming beneath skylights. A sign above the factory gates read, "Victory is our job." One German mechanic muttered under his breath, "At home we have none of this left." For the first time, Brenner didn't argue. He could only watch as the landscape unfolded like a Revelation cities bursting with cranes, smokestacks, and billboards advertising tires, coffee, radios, all luxuries Germany had long forgotten. When night fell, their convoy entered a quiet countryside dotted with red barns and grain silos. Even here, freight trains thundered by every few minutes, their cars brimming with tanks, artillery, and locomotives. Brenner turned to Kraus. "If this is only one state," he said softly, "then we never had a chance." The American sergeant overheard, his gaze steady but not unkind. "You're right, Lieutenant," he said. "This is just Virginia." Outside, another freight train screamed through the dark, sparks flashing against the rails, the heartbeat of a nation that never slept. July 3rd, 1943, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The bus rumbled down a dirt road and came to a stop before a sea of barbed wire and watchtowers. Yet as the prisoners stepped out, what greeted them was not the brutal austerity they'd imagined, but order, discipline, and a strange sense of abundance. The camp stretched for acres, neat wooden barracks, open courtyards, even a small chapel and library. Rows of American flags flapped lazily in the Kansas wind. "Prisoners of war," Brenner muttered, scanning the horizon, "living better than our soldiers at the front." Inside the camp fence, American guards lounged in the shade, relaxed but alert. They were armed, yet their faces carried none of the hatred Brenner expected. At the mess hall, POWs were handed trays of hot food, beef stew, bread, butter, coffee, real coffee. "This must be some kind of trick," whispered Kraus. "No trick," replied the camp interpreter, a young sergeant from Chicago. "You work, you eat. Simple as that." Work meant everything from harvesting wheat to repairing farm machinery. The Germans were astonished at the tools provided: tractors, combine harvesters, electric welders. The machines worked flawlessly, maintained by civilians who treated them with respect, not fear. "You trust us with this equipment?" asked one skeptical engineer. The American foreman shrugged. "It's insured. You break it, we'll fix it." That's so. In the evenings, the men were allowed to walk within the compound's boundaries. From the fence, they could see the silhouettes of freight trains rolling toward the horizon, boxcars filled with grain, steel, and munitions. The rhythm never stopped. Even in the heartland, the war machine pulsed. Some POWs received mail from homes censored, weary letters from wives describing rationing, bombings, shortages. The contrast was unbearable. In Kansas, there was food, electricity, and steady work. In Berlin, hunger and fear. At night, under the stars, Brenner listened to the hum of distant engines and thought about the ocean of production surrounding them. The Americans didn't just fight with soldiers, they fought with systems invisible, endless systems that no army could bomb into silence. He wrote in his diary, "We came here thinking we were the superior race. Now I see the true superiority is not pride, but purpose." One of the guards later found Brenner's entry during inspection. He didn't confiscate it. He simply underlined one sentence and left the book open on the bunk. The true superiority is not pride, but purpose. Outside, floodlights flickered on, and another train roared past the camp, vanishing into the American night. August 1943, the Midwest, United States. The summer heat shimmered over endless plains of wheat and steel. Each day, trucks rolled out from Camp Concordia carrying POWs to farms, factories, and depots. For many Germans, it was the first time they had seen America beyond the wire. What they found defied belief. Their assigned labor site was a farm co-op outside Salina, Kansas, a vast operation that looked more like a logistics hub than a farm. Massive silos towered over conveyor belts that moved grain with mechanical precision. Tractors the size of tanks rumbled past, driven by women in bandanas and denim. "Frauen," muttered Kraus, shading his eyes. "They run this place?" The foreman laughed. "They run half the country, pal." As the POWs shoveled grain and repaired machinery, they noticed something unnerving. Nothing ever stopped. If a machine broke, a spare part appeared within hours. If a truck needed fuel, a tanker came that same afternoon. The system functioned like an organism, one artery feeding another. During breaks, the men sat under the shade of an oak tree, watching freight trains in the distance. Every 30 minutes, a train screamed by hundreds of cars long, carrying tanks, jeeps, and shells, each one marked with a white star. "Back home," said Brenner quietly. "Our factories work in shifts. Our trains run when the rails aren't bombed. Here, it never ends." "Oh," Kraus nodded, his jaw tight. "We thought they were soft. But this?" He gestured toward the horizon, where another train thundered west. "This is discipline without fear." That evening, as the men loaded grain sacks, an American foreman turned on a portable radio. Swing music filled the barn horns, laughter, applause. For a moment, even the German prisoners forgot themselves. Life here was vibrant, unbroken by war. When the sun set, the sky turned copper and gold over the plains. The POW trucks rolled back toward camp, headlights cutting through the dust. Brenner stared out the window, seeing telephone poles flicker past like the ticks of a metronome, each one marking another heartbeat in America's industrial rhythm. Later that night, as he lay on his bunk, he whispered to Kraus, "We thought victory was about courage, but maybe it's about endurance." Outside, the night hummed with distant engines, factories, still alive long after the sun had gone down. For the German prisoners, sleep came slowly. The realization had taken root. They were inside the belly of something vast, something their country could never match. And for the first time, they felt not just defeated, but outbuilt. September 10th, 1943, Fort Worth, Texas. The train screeched to a halt beside a thunderous landscape of steel and smoke. The prisoners stared through the windows, mouths slightly open. It wasn't a battlefield, but to the Germans it looked like one. Sparks rained from welders. The air vibrated with the clang of hammers and the roar of engines being tested. They had arrived for temporary labor at the Consolidated Aircraft Plant, one of dozens scattered across the nation. But nothing could have prepared them for what lay beyond the gate. Inside, endless assembly lines stretched as far as the eye could see. Men and women in coveralls moved in rhythm, guiding the skeletons of B-24 bombers down tracks like metal leviathans. Overhead, a voice echoed from a loudspeaker. "Keep 'em flying, folks. Liberty needs your hands." Oberleutnant Brenner felt dizzy. He had seen German aircraft factories, proud, efficient, but compact. This was something else entirely. He counted at least 20 bombers under construction, each in a different stage. In one corner, Fuselages were riveted by teams of women. In another, engines were tested on giant steel mounts that shook the floor. Kraus leaned close, whispering as if in church. Mein Gott, Karl. They build an air force every week. An American supervisor noticed their awe and smiled faintly. That's about right, he said. We roll one of these out every hour. The words hung in the air like cannon fire. Every hour. As the Germans worked moving crates and sweeping floors, they observed everything was systemized. Spare parts were numbered, color-coded, delivered on conveyor belts. If a rivet was missing, a runner fetched it in seconds. There was no shouting, no chaos, only the rhythm of industry. When the shift whistle blew, Brenner and Kraus stepped outside, blinking in the sunlight. In the distance, they could see trucks hauling aircraft wings down freshly paved highways. Trains waited nearby, ready to carry bombers to the coasts for deployment. A young American worker sat beside them during the lunch break, unwrapping a sandwich. "You boys from Africa?" he asked casually. Brenner nodded. The worker grinned. "Well, now you're in the real desert, one made of steel." As the prisoners laughed awkwardly, a deep rumble filled the air. They looked up and watched a newly completed B-24 lift-off from the adjacent runway, its propellers shimmering in the sunday. The workers below cheered. Brenner felt the sound vibrate through his chest. Pride, power, certainty. He realized something terrifying. The Americans didn't just build for war, they believed in what they built. That night, as the train carried them back toward Kansas, the prisoners sat in silence. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against steel echoed the factory's pulse, steady, confident, eternal. And in that sound, they heard the truth none dared to speak aloud. Germany had already lost. October 1943, Camp Concordia, Kansas. Autumn rolled across the plains like a quiet tide. The wheat fields turned gold, the air cooled, and life in the POW camp settled into rhythm. Yet beneath the daily routine, something had changed in the hearts of the prisoners, especially the officers and engineers. They had seen the inside of America's machine, and it haunted them. Every evening after work, Brenner sat by the barracks window with a stub of pencil, writing in a small notebook the guards allowed him to keep. "They do not fear shortages," he wrote. "They have mastered distance. Every state is a factory, every farm a supply line. We are fighting a nation of engines." Occasionally, the camp commander, a calm, polite man named Captain Robert Hayes, would stop by for inspections. He treated the Germans not as enemies, but as men under his care. One evening, as he passed Brenner's table, he noticed the notebook. "Engineer?" Hayes asked. "Artillery officer," Brenner replied. "But, yes, I studied mechanical design before the war." Hayes nodded. "That's why you understand what you're seeing. Most don't." Then, almost kindly, he added, "We build because we must not, because we can't be beaten, but because we refuse to stop." The captain walked away, leaving Brenner staring at his words long into the night. In the camp recreation hall, the guards occasionally played the radio news bulletins, swing music, and the steady voice of President Roosevelt. One broadcast froze the room into silence. "Production has surpassed all goals. Our shipyards are now delivering a vessel every 24 hours. The Germans exchanged glances. They knew what that meant: more convoys, more aircraft carriers, more bombers raining destruction on Europe. Kraus clenched his fists. How can any army fight that? But Brenner, staring at the floorboards, whispered, "We can't." As weeks passed, letters from Germany trickled in. Paper thin, censored, heavy with despair. One came from Brenner's younger brother, still fighting on the Eastern Front. "We freeze, we starve, we hold the line. The Russians never stop coming. Tell me, do they treat you well?" Brenner folded the letter carefully, staring at the horizon beyond the camp fence. He wanted to write back, to explain what he had seen: the factories, the highways, the planes, but what could he say? That their defeat was not due to bravery or tactics, but to scale. One evening, during roll call, the lights flickered as a freight train thundered past the camp, Another endless line of tanks, trucks, and locomotives. The sound filled the Kansas night like distant thunder. Kraus broke the silence. "You hear that, Karl? That's the sound of inevitability." Brenner nodded slowly. "No, Dieter. That's the sound of America thinking." He looked through the barbed wire, past the guard towers, toward the glowing horizon. Beyond it lay an empire not of conquest, but of capacity, an empire built from light, electricity, and endless motion. And he finally understood. Germany had gambled on willpower. America had bet on endurance, and endurance was winning. November 1943, near Chicago, Illinois. The air was crisp and cold when the trucks rolled north from Kansas. A group of trusted POWs, including Brenner and Kraus, were being transferred temporarily to assist at a rail maintenance depot outside Chicago. None of them knew that this journey would redefine their understanding of the war and of the nation holding them. As the convoy approached the city, the landscape transformed. The horizon rose into a forest of smokestacks. Miles of track fanned out like arteries. Freight yards stretched in every direction, tens of thousands of rail cars, each loaded with supplies marked U.S. Army ordnance. The prisoners stared in silence.
Follow the tracks!
The depot was an industrial city within a city, steam cranes lifting locomotives, repair crews hammering through the night. Sparks flew like fireflies in the dark. A foreman led them through the noise, explaining casually, "This line sends food to the Pacific. That one's bound for the East Coast. Over there, ammunition for North Africa. We run 24 hours a day, every day." "Every day?" Brenner asked, incredulous. "Every hour," the man corrected. In the distance, they saw enormous factories bearing familiar names: Ford, General Motors, International Harvester. Tanks rolled off production lines that once built tractors. Trucks destined for the army were lined up in rows longer than runways. Above the skyline, plumes of steam and smoke merged into one living breath, the respiration of a continent at work. Kraus's face was pale. "They're not mobilized for war," he muttered. "They are war." Inside the maintenance hangar, Brenner found himself staring at a machine that left him speechless. A diesel locomotive under assembly, its pistons as large as artillery shells. An American engineer noticed his fascination and smiled. "She'll pull 100 cars by herself. Built last week, hauling next week." "How long to build it?" Brenner asked. 5 days, came the reply. 5 days. In Germany, such an engine would take months if the parts even arrived. Brenner ran his hand over the polished metal, tracing the letters stamped into its side. Made in America. During the lunch break, a foreman gestured for the POWs to sit. They shared sandwiches and black coffee, conversation awkward at first. Then one of the Americans asked, "So, how's life back home?" Kraus hesitated. "Hungry. Bombed." The man nodded slowly. "Ours too, but we rebuild faster than they can hit us." That sentence echoed through Brenner's mind long after they returned to camp. "We rebuild faster than they can hit us." That night, staring out the train window, Brenner saw the reflection of endless factory lights flickering past like stars reborn on the ground. He whispered to himself, "In Germany, our genius builds one masterpiece. In America, their unity builds 1,000. The train rattled through the night, each wheel clacking like a hammer of inevitability. By the time they returned to Kansas, something inside Brenner had shifted forever. He no longer saw America as the enemy. He saw it as proof of what humanity could achieve when fear was replaced by purpose. January 1944, Camp Concordia, Kansas. Snow blanketed the camp, softening the sound of boots and barbed wire. The war in Europe raged on, but here, in the heart of America, time moved differently. The prisoners had become part of a strange, quiet rhythm, working, writing, thinking. Yet beneath the calm, a silent revelation was spreading among them. Letters from home arrived in small bundles, thin, trembling sheets of paper, each line filled with the exhaustion of a nation under siege. "The city is rubble," wrote Brenner's brother from Berlin. "Factories gone, Trains stopped. We fight with nothing but orders. That night, Brenner folded the letter and slipped it under his mattress. The contrast between those words and what surrounded him felt unbearable. Outside, the hum of American logistics continued, trucks passing at midnight, floodlights from distant rail yards glowing against the clouds. At dinner, the prisoners spoke in low voices. One mechanic from Bremen said, "When I return home, I'll tell them we never understood what we were fighting." Another shook his head. "They won't believe you. None of them will." Kraus leaned forward. "They don't have to believe. They'll see it soon enough." The guards didn't interfere. By now, even the Americans sensed something had shifted inside the Germans. These men were no longer soldiers plotting escape. They were witnesses processing a revelation that they had glimpsed the true scale of modern war, and it was not found in courage, nor in ideology, but in capacity. Days later, the camp chaplain, an older man named Father Callahan, held a short Sunday service in the mess hall. When he spoke of forgiveness and understanding, some of the Germans bowed their heads. Afterward, Brenner lingered as others filed out. "Father," he asked quietly, "do you think God favors one side in war?" The chaplain studied him. "No, but he does bless wisdom and punishes arrogance." Brenner nodded slowly, as though he had been waiting to hear those words. By spring, the POWs' labor had expanded to nearby construction projects, bridges, silos, irrigation systems. They worked beside American civilians, shared meals, and saw something extraordinary: cooperation without compulsion. One afternoon, as they watched American workers pour concrete for a bridge, Kraus turned to Brenner. "In Germany, this would take a battalion of engineers." "Here," Brenner replied, "it takes a community." That night, a freight train passed the camp again. Its cars stacked high with tanks, trucks, and crates of rations. The whistle echoed across the snow-covered plains like a prophecy. Brenner wrote in his diary, "This land does not win wars with hatred. It wins them with hands, millions of them, building in unison." He paused, staring at the ink bleeding into the page, then added one final line. "And now I understand why our empire will fall and theirs will not." Outside, the wind howled over the fences, but within the barracks, the men lay awake, no longer thinking of escape, but of truth. They had seen the beating heart of America, and it had changed them forever. May 1946 Bremerhaven, Germany. The ship's horn wailed through the fog as hundreds of men stood on deck, their eyes fixed on a coastline they hadn't seen in years. The war was over. Hitler was dead. Germany was a scarred ruin. The prisoners, no longer prisoners, clutched thin duffel bags stamped US Army property as they prepared to disembark. Oberleutnant Karl Brenner leaned against the railing, his face older, thinner, but calm. Kraus stood beside him, silent. Below them, the harbour was a wasteland of twisted cranes and sunken hulls. Smoke still rose from the skeletons of bombed warehouses. Where once had stood the heart of German industry, there was now only rubble and silence. As they walked down the gangplank, American officers handed them repatriation papers. The sergeant who gave Brenner his documents smiled faintly. "Good luck, Lieutenant," he said. "You'll need it." Brenner met his eyes and replied softly, "We will rebuild." Differently this time. They boarded a military truck bound for what remained of Hamburg. Along the way, the devastation grew. Whole towns flattened, bridges gone, railways torn apart. It looked less like a country than a ghost of one. Kraus broke the silence first. "We thought America was soft. We thought they'd tire before winter." Brenner shook his head. "They never tired, Dieter. They just began." Rel. He thought of the Liberty ships gliding across the Atlantic, the B-24 seconds rising every hour, the endless lines of trucks, trains, welders, and hands. He thought of the Kansas nights filled with the hum of unseen engines, the sound of a civilization that never slept. Weeks later, in what was left of his hometown, Brenner found his mother alive but frail. Their home had lost its roof. Their street was dust. He gave her the only gift he had: a small notebook, worn and yellowed. Inside were his writings from the camp. She read one line aloud: The true superiority is not pride, but purpose. She looked up, her eyes wet.
We're taking heavy
You
fire
believe
from
this?
the left.
Yes, he answered. I saw it. Years passed. Brenner became an engineer once more, not for war, but for rebuilding. He taught apprentices how to weld, how to measure tolerance, how to think not as conquerors, but as craftsmen. When asked what he had learned in America, he would pause, choosing his words carefully. That power is not just strength, it is rhythm. When a nation moves as one mind, one heartbeat, even the impossible becomes routine. He kept one photo on his workshop wall. A black and white image of a Liberty ship under construction, sparks flying like stars. Beneath it, he had written in pencil, "They fought with factories." Each night, as he locked up his workshop, Brenner would listen to the sound of German trains rolling again, tentative, halting, rebuilding, and he would whisper a silent prayer that they would never again be turned toward conquest, but toward creation. Because he had seen what industry could do both to destroy and to redeem. And he knew that somewhere across the ocean, in that vast and tireless land, the hum of America's engines still carried through the night.